Hello Animals fans and welcome back to AniLysis. Today we're looking at Big Jim / the Gorilla Morph. Because that's a picture of somebody who probably looks like Big Jim. So that's a gorilla, and that's a gorilla in an enclosure. Because we first find Big Jim in an enclosure. He appears in book 1, The Invasion, and is then seen as a morph throughout essentially the whole rest of the book series. He is Marco's battle morph. What do I mean by battle morph? If you're an Animals fan, you know. If you're not an Animals fan, here's the gist of it. Each one of the main cast of characters has a specific morph that they tend to use, not always, but usually use in battle situations. You know, their biggest, bulkiest, baddest morphs. And Marco's is the gorilla, or Big Jim, as he was known in his enclosure at the zoo. These are, of course, not real photos of Big Jim, because Big Jim doesn't exist, he's a fictional character. Just so you know. Okay, so let's get to grips with Big Jim, shall we? Where do we first meet him? Well, of course, we meet him at the gardens, when the Animorphs are looking for their big first morphs. Not the first ones, although in this case it is. This is Marco's first morph, the gorilla. You know, jumping in at the deep end, of course. So let's look at some quotes. Cassie led us to the main building, which holds all kinds of exhibits. It has everything but the really big animals that need lots of space. The main building is supposed to be like a rainforest, I guess. It's where they keep animals that need to be warm all the time. There's a pathway that winds around with tall tropical trees overhead, with bushes here and there between the exhibits. There are walkways behind all these exhibits. That's how they feed the animals and give them meds or whatever. It was an odd change from outside to inside. 1 minute we were in this fake rainforest. The next minute we were in what looked like a hallway at school. Only the smell was worse. Kind of damp and mouldy and musty. More like the boys' locker room. So they're in the not so big animals' house. So I've chosen this picture over here deliberately because I think that's the sort of thing that we'd be looking at here. So it looks like it's an inside exhibit, or at least mostly. You've got the glass separating Big Jim from the people coming in. They're obviously indoors. And there's a big monkey climbing facility. And there he is, sitting there. It looks like there's a couple more in this picture, but for the purposes of this, there's just Big Jim in this enclosure. Okay? And they have to go through this inside bit, which is all nicely decorated. And then in order to get to Big Jim physically, Cassie, whose mother works as a vet at the gardens, goes into the back passages. And as we find out later in the series from book 39, Marco's mother is crap at her job. So of course there are no keys to any of this. So any old kid can just freaking come in and then walk into the gorilla enclosure. What's that look for? You
said Marco's mum, not Cassie's mum.
Cassie's mum. So, did I say Marco's mum, did I? I apologise, everyone. My real-time proofreader is here with me. Thank you, dear. Thank you, my dear. You get a biscuit tonight.
I was confused. I was like,
yeah, Cassie's mum is terrible at her job, so Cassie and the gang are able to walk in and find the staff entrance to Big Jim's enclosure. How do you guys feel about gorillas? Cassie said. She had stopped by one of the numbered doors. This is Big Jim's cage. He just came over from another zoo, so he's in his own private environment for now. He's very gentle. Rachel batted her eyes at Marco. How about you, Marco? Haven't you always wanted to be a big, hairy guy? Marco didn't look like he was crazy about the idea. But I knew how to handle Marco. Maybe Marco should try something easier for his first morph, I said. You know, like a cuddly little koala or something. That did it. Koala? Marco said, giving me a dirty look. Open that door, Cassie. Cassie opened her backpack. She took out an apple and handed it to Marco. Here, you just open the door. The way it's set up, none of the visitors will be able to see you unless you walk clear out into the cage. Besides, there's an extra security gate, so he can't jump out and he can't just walk in. So we just open the door and hope Big Jim feels like eating. Behind the door was a second door of steel bars, with a little cutaway section for the handlers to shove the food through. The entire door opening was concealed behind a fake rock ledge, so it wasn't visible to the people looking into the cage. But Big Jim noticed us right away. He climbed heavily down from his perch on a rock ledge and took a good look at us through the bars. Big Jim was definitely big. He had fingers the size of my wrist. But Jim didn't seem to mind us being there. Mostly he seemed interested in Marco's apple. He looked Marco over, snorted like he wasn't impressed, and then held out his hand. "Hand in the apple," Cassie directed. "He wants the apple." "I loved your work in King Kong vs. Godzilla," Marco told the ape. He stuck his hand through the bars and held out the apple. With surprising daintiness, the gorilla lifted the apple and began inspecting it closely. "Hold his hand," I said. "Yeah, right," Marco laughed. "When you acquire DNA, the animal goes into a kind of trance," I said. "Go ahead, grab his hand and concentrate." Marco tentatively touched the gorilla's wrists. "Nice monkey." The gorilla ignored him. Big Jim was much more interested in the apple than in any of us. Marco closed his eyes. The ape closed his eyes. "This is so cool," Tobias commented. "You realise that gorilla could pull Marco apart like he was a paper doll? Look at those arms." Marco opened one eye. "Tobias, being terrified gets in the way of concentrating. So how about if you shut up about his arms?" So this is how Marco acquired Big Jim. And that's all we actually see of Big Jim, the individual Big Jim. And from this point on, Big Jim is nothing more than a morph for Marco. There was one inconsistency I spotted throughout reading these notes here, the notes that I've forgotten to take off my screen. So earlier on, Cassie said that he's now in a private enclosure because he's new to the zoo, which would imply that he's not visible to the public. And yet, the couple of quotes that followed that one are her talking about if you're hidden from the public by the layout of this cage and where the door is. So they're not going to be too worried about being seen by the public if they're coming in through the back staff door. So, bit of an inconsistency there. But then again, it is Animorphs and the wife's got her hand up.
The book said he was secluded from the other gorillas, not from people.
It didn't say that.
It was, if you thought about it, that's what it meant.
Fair point. That could be right. See, this is why I hired her to be my wife. You know, I'll say something, and then she'll womansplain me, and I'll have to accept my wrongness. She's probably right. It's just the way it's written. It says it's a private enclosure, which you'd assume that means that the public can't see in.
No, it means they quarantine new animals that come into zoos.
Yeah, they do. But when they quarantine animals that come into the zoo, they also don't get seen by the public. So it's a bit weird like that, but whatever. It's only a very minor thing. Anyway, so we've now got Big Jim as a morph. So let's look into... You're right. Oh. My wife's hissing in the background. Like, what's going on? Are you transforming into Beelzebub? Just here in the background, she goes...
I did not.
Yes, you did.
I did not.
You don't. I wouldn't have pointed it out if it was that minor.
Every time I make a noise, you're like, what?
Right, anyway. So, what is the first time Marco uses the gorilla morph? Well, funnily enough, it's during a battle. Okay, let's look at the quote from when he first morphs the gorilla. "And then I saw Marco. Big Jim's massive body was ripping its way out of Marco's slight frame. 'Just call me King,' Marco said. 'King Kong.' The truth is, like Cassie said, gorillas are very gentle, peaceful, quiet creatures. The truth also is that they are strong, real strong. Basically, compared to a gorilla, a man is something made out of toothpicks. Now, Hork-Bajir are pretty large creatures. They stand about 2 meters high and are built for trouble. But Marco swung one big gorilla fist and hit the nearest Hork-Bajir in the stomach. The Hork-Bajir went down, hard. I roared. Rachel trumpeted. Marco lifted the Hork-Bajir up and tossed him aside like a rag doll. A pretty suitable entrance to the Big Jim morph, Marco's battle morph. They're in the pool. Everything's going a bit shit. Rachel and Jake have already gotten into the action. And Marco decides, okay, now it's time for me to morph as well. And he goes big gorilla, ooh, and starts punching everything here, there and everywhere. And that is essentially the gist of the gorilla morph throughout the rest of the series. But the gorilla does have a couple of other skills which we'll go into. Let's look though at the first time we see Marco morph gorilla from his point of view. And it comes in book 5, the Predator. Yeah, that's the one. The first thing that happened was the fur. It sprouted quickly from my arms and legs and all down my body. Thick, rough, ragged, black fur. It grew long on my arms and back and head. It was shorter everywhere else. My jaw bulged forward. I could hear the bones in my jaw grind as they stretched and the non-human DNA changed my body. With this morph I had arms, as usual. Only they were a lot bigger. A lot bigger. My legs bent forward. My shoulders grew so massive it was like having a couple of pigs sitting on my back. I also had an enormous round belly and a leathery chest. My face was a black, bulging, rubbery mask, and my eyes were practically invisible beneath my heavy brow. I had become a gorilla. So we know that the gorilla morph is incredibly powerful, and Marken can use it to bash things and smash things and do a bit of heavy lifting or heavy, not, you know, the opposite of lifting, that thing. Yeah. What else can the gorilla morph do? Well, it's got a very special thing, very much like us humans have. And that is, you're right my dear, opposable thumbs. You, Big Jim, have got them things. Which means you can grab things. Whoa, fluff-a-doodle. Grab, grab, grab. Yeah? But that makes the gorilla morph useful for other things. And there are a few examples dotted around this series, and I've got a couple where that very special technique can come into play. The others barreled after her. I hesitated for just a moment while I felt in the dark for the pemalite crystal. Aside from Axe, I was the only one with hands. Then I went after them. I plunged wildly into total darkness with a tiny crystal in my massive fist. I fell. The floor of the ravine was a long, long, long way down. I saw a brutish, massive arm shoot out. A fist the size of a Virginia baked ham grabbed my leg. I stopped falling. I slammed into the ravine wall, and the massive arm yanked me back upwards, right up into the shallow cave in the ravine wall. No earth animal could possibly have caught a falling, 2-metre tall Hork-Bajir in midair. No animal except a gorilla. Now there are many examples of the gorilla showing up throughout the series, but they largely play the same role of being the battle morph. So I'm not going to cover any more cuts, because I don't feel that there were too many more notable things going on with the gorilla apart from that. So that is essentially the Big Jim and gorilla morph. If you think there's anything in this series regarding the gorilla that was noteworthy that I haven't included in this video, please do tell me, and I shall do an addendum video to this video. But that basically covers Big Jim and the gorilla morph. That's basically it. So even though this is a short AniLysis video, it is a really important morph in the context of the series, but it's basically just for brute strength. Okay. But thank you very much for watching the first AniLysis of 2023. I hope you like the new setup. I need to get some new lighting at some point so it looks even better, and so it's not broken. Thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you next time. Ta-ra.